Do you know what it means to die for an idea? In the morning of September 12, 1977, in a cold Pretoria prison cell, a young man lay naked, shackled, and broken. His body bore the marks of days of brutal interrogation. His head, swollen from beatings, throbbed with internal bleeding. He was only 30 years old. His crime? Not carrying a weapon, not plotting a bombing, but daring to say something that terrified the apartheid regime more than bullets. The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. So he said. This man was Steve Biko. To the white minority rulers, he was public enemy number one. To millions of black South Africans, he was a voice of pride, of dignity, of freedom. But by the time his body was discovered, abandoned on a prison mat, it was clear the apartheid state would rather kill him than let his ideas live. Yet, history has a cruel irony, because in trying to silence Steve Biko, the regime turned him into something far more powerful, a martyr, a symbol, a rallying cry that the world will never forget. This is the story of Steve Biko, the young medical student who became a philosopher, the thinker who became a threat, the man whose death shook the foundations of apartheid and awoken the conscience of the world. Before proceeding to the story of Steve Biko, if you're here, please kindly subscribe, share this video, and like. This makes YouTube happy and helps us continue doing what we're doing. To understand Steve Biko, you first have to understand the world that shaped him. South Africa in the 1960s was a laboratory of racial engineering. The apartheid government led by the National Party had perfected a system designed to keep black South Africans poor, voiceless, and invincible. Think of it this way. You could not vote. You could not live where you wanted. You could not even walk into a restaurant if it had the sign, whites only, as a black person. Every aspect of life was written into law. The Populations Registration Act classified people by race. The Group Areas Act forced black families out of their homes into distant townships. The Bantu Education Act ensured that black children were taught only the bare minimum, just enough to make them cheap laborers, never leaders. It was a suffocating system, and worse still, most of the recognized black leaders had been silenced. Nelson Mandela and his comrades in the ANC had been jailed after Rivonia. The PAC was banned. Political activity was dangerous, sometimes suicidal. By the late 1960s, a new generation of young South Africans were restless. They had grown up knowing nothing but apartheid, nothing but humiliation. And they asked, if the old leaders are gone, who will speak for us? Into that silence stepped Steve Biko, a medical student in his 20s, tall, charismatic, and sharp-eyed. He didn't carry a gun, but his words were sharper than any weapon. He told young South Africans something they had been told never to believe. He told them, the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is not the army or the police, it is your mind. If you let them make you believe you are inferior. This was the beginning of a revolution of the spirit. Steve Biko was not just a critic of apartheid, he was an architect of something new, the philosophy of black consciousness. At its core, black consciousness was simple but radical. Biko argued that the greatest victory of apartheid was psychological, that he had taught black South Africans to see themselves as second class, as unworthy, as people who must wait for others to liberate them. But he flipped the script. He said, the first step to liberation was not guns, not even political power, it was to reclaim dignity, to teach black people to believe in their own words, to declare loudly, black is beautiful. In 1968, while studying medicine at the University of Natal, Biko and other students broke away from the white-dominated National Union of South African Students to form something new, the South African Students Organization, SASO. SASO was not just a student body, it became the beating heart of black consciousness. Its rallies, pamphlets, and speeches reached into universities, churches, and townships. Biko encouraged black South Africans to run their own clinics, build their own schools, start their own businesses. The message was clear. Stop waiting for permission. Stop waiting for white liberals to save you. Liberation starts with self-reliance. And this message spread like wildfire. By the early 1970s, the Black consciousness movement was no longer confined to campuses. It had become a national force, inspiring a generation of young activists. The apartheid regime noticed and they grew afraid. Because unlike armed resistance, Biko's revolution could not easily be crushed by bullets. It was a war of ideas, and it was winning. By the mid-1970s, Steve Biko had become one of the most dangerous men in South Africa. Not because he carried a gun, but because he carried an idea. And apartheid feared ideas. In 1973, the government struck back. They banned Biko under the Suppression of Communism Act. This meant he couldn't speak in public, he couldn't be quoted in newspapers, he couldn't attend gatherings. In fact, legally, he couldn't even leave his district in King Williamstown. The regime wanted him erased. But Biko found other ways to remain in presence. He continued to write. His essays, later collected into I Write What I Like, carried his voice across the country. In those pages, you hear a young man dismantling apartheid not with fury but with clarity. He wrote, "The type of black man we have today has lost his manhood. The first step is to make the black man come to himself, to pump back life into his empty shell." Even confined, Biko built clinics, community centers, and literacy programs. His fingerprints were everywhere. And then came June 16, 1976. The Soweto uprising. Thousands of school children marched against the imposition of Afrikaans as a teaching language. Police opened fire, hundreds were killed. Images of children shot in the street shocked the world. Behind the spirit of those students was Biko's message. They had been fed on black consciousness. They had been taught to stand tall. The apartheid state now understood. Silencing Steve Biko was no longer an option. It was a necessity. And so, the net closed in. September 1977. Steve Biko was only 30 years old. He was stopped at his police roadblock outside Grahamstown, arrested under the Terrorism Act, taken into custody by the infamous Port Elizabeth Security Police. What followed was a horror story hidden behind official walls. Biko was stripped naked, shackled, and beaten. Reports later showed he suffered massive head injuries. Instead of being treated in a hospital, he was chained to a window grill. When he slipped in and out of consciousness, police mocked him, calling him boy. After days of abuse, he was thrown in the back of a police Land Rover, naked, injured, and barely alive. They drove him over 1,100 kilometers to Pretoria, bumping along dusty roads, each jolt a fresh agony for him. On September 12, 1977, Steve Biko was pronounced dead in detention. What was the official line? They said he died from a hunger strike. But the autopsy revealed the truth. Brain damage caused by violent blows to the head. His last recorded words, spoken defiantly to his interrogators, still echo. "I write what I like, I will not be told what to write." Biko's death was not just a killing, it was an execution by a system that feared his voice more than any weapon. But the irony is this: in trying to silence Biko, the regime amplified him. When news of Steve Biko's death broke, South Africa trembled and the whole world erupted. Inside the country, anger boiled over. More than 20,000 people defied apartheid restrictions to attend his funeral in King Williamstown. Among the mourners were political leaders, students, clergy, a whole generation united in grief and defiance. They sang freedom songs under the watch of armed police, turning Biko's burial into a national act of resistance. The apartheid regime tried to contain the fire, banning his organizations, censoring his writings, and suppressing protests. But it was too late. Steve Biko's death had become a rallying cry. As Archbishop Desmond Tutu put it, the death of Steve Biko was like striking a match in dry grass. His blood watered the tree of freedom. Internationally, the reaction was seismic. The United Nations Security Council condemned the apartheid regime. Government that once hesitated to criticize South Africa could no longer look away. Headlines screamed across the globe. Black leader dies in police custody. The Denny Mall in Britain wrote, "The world will remember Biko's name long after those who killed him are forgotten." Musicians like Peter Gabriel turned his story into anthems. Churches invoked his name in sermons. In London, New York, Lagos, and Lusaka, his face appeared on posters, his words painted on walls. Why such outrage? Because Biko was not a soldier. He did not plant bombs or carry guns. His weapon was his mind. His philosophy of black consciousness threatened the entire logic of apartheid. That white rule was natural and unshakable. By killing Biko, the apartheid state revealed its greatest fear, the power of an awakened people. As Biko once said, the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And after he's dead, that weapon passed to millions. To understand Biko is to understand black consciousness. At its core, it was not about the hatred of white. It was about liberation of black consciousness itself. It was about reclaiming dignity in a society built on humiliation. In his own words, the greatest mistake is to allow yourself to be defined by someone else's definition. Biko saw that apartheid was not just a system of laws, it was a system of psychology. It drilled inferiority into the minds of black South Africans, convincing them they were less. So Biko fought to turn psychology into politics. He urged black South Africans, Coloureds, and Indians to stand tall, to organize themselves and to refuse dependency on white liberals. He once declared, "Black man, you're on your own." This was not a call for isolation, it was a call for self-reliance, for Africans to lead their own liberation, to stop waiting for white approval, to take ownership of their destiny. Through the South African Students' Organization and later the Black People's Convention, Biko mobilized a generation. He organized community programs, clinics, literacy drives. He inspired music, poetry, and theater, and the entire cultural pulse of a people awakening. He gave black South Africans something apartheid could not crush: pride. One of his most famous lines captures it. "We must fill our minds with our own pride, not the false images of ourselves that apartheid feed us. The most positive act we can take is to be ourselves." It was this philosophy, this insistence of mental emancipation that terrified the regime. Because if millions of black South Africans began to see themselves as equal, apartheid foundation will crack. And that is exactly what Biko was building when the state silenced him. Steve Biko was buried on September 1977. His coffin wrapped in black, green, and gold. Tens of thousands of mourners came, even though the regime tried to suppress the funeral. Among them were leaders who later shaped South Africa's future: Desmond Tutu, Oliver Tambo, and countless young activists who carried his words in their hearts like a shield. But in truth, Biko was never buried. His body was lowered in the ground, yes, but his spirit, his philosophy, only grew louder. When Nelson Mandela finally walked free in 1990, he said of Biko, "They had to kill him to prolong the life of apartheid. The memory of his life and death is always with us." Biko became a martyr. His face appeared on posters. His words were whispered in classrooms. His philosophy was stitched into the fabric of South Africa's liberation struggle. And even now, decades after apartheid officially ended, the shadow of Steve Biko looms. Why? Because the wounds of apartheid left behind are still open. South Africa remains one of the most unequal countries in the world. According to the World Bank, it has the highest inequality index globally. Wealth and land are still concentrated in the hands of a few disproportionately white. Millions of black South Africans live in poverty while luxury suburbs sit just kilometers away. In other words, the struggle Biko spoke of is not over. That's why his words still resonate with youths of South Africa today. When students chant "Fees must fall" in protest for affordable education, when communities march for land reform, when voices demand dignity and equality, they're echoing Biko's black consciousness. And beyond South Africa, his name has become a global symbol. From Jamaica to United States, from Soweto to Lagos, people speak of Biko in the same breath as Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and Patrice Lumumba. Because his message was universal. Before chains can be broken outside, they must first be broken inside. Biko once said, "The call for black consciousness is the most positive call to come from any group in the black world in the last 100 years. It says, 'Black man, you're on your own.' And that is his legacy. Not despair but empowerment, not fear but pride." Steve Biko's life was short, only 30 years. But his impact was immense. He did not live to see freedom, but he made freedom inevitable. Today, as South Africa and India Africa continues its unfinished journey towards justice, one truth remains. Biko's voice still speaks, his struggle is still alive, and his question still demands an answer. How free are we, really? if our minds are still chained.
We see a completely non-racial society. We believe that in our country there shall be no minority, there shall be no majority, there shall just be people. And those people will have the same status before the law, and they will have the same political rights before the law.
Thank you for watching this episode. If you like this video, share with someone, subscribe.